Hello, everyone. Welcome to Being Patient Brain Talks. I'm Deborah Kahn, founder of Being Patient. Well, a lot of you ask us a lot of questions about supplements, and we unfortunately don't have a lot of the answers because supplements aren't regulated like prescription medications. Well, we recently published an article by Dr. Duane Mellor, who joins us today, on turmeric. The properties of turmeric are, they claim to reduce inflammation and improve overall health. Surprised by how many of you read it and commented on it, we decided we would invite Dr. Mellor to Being Patient to do a live talk for you. So thank you so much for joining us and welcome.
Well, it's good to be here from the UK.
From the UK, Birmingham to be exact. So thanks so much for joining us. So let's just start first with, do we know the history behind turmeric and why it was looked at to have medicinal properties in it?
So if we go back, there's two strands of the history. One, which is definitely more concrete, is it's over 4,000 years it's been using something called Ayurveda or Ayurvedic medicine, which is a sort of a stream that's linked to the practice of Hinduism in sort of the Indian subcontinent. And it was used to treat all sorts of things from arthritis through to wind, and it still has claims and some data linked to pain relief. So it's been used for a long time. It's used as a food substance, which, you use it to wrap around meat to stop the meat going off. So it has a preserving effect in food. And there's even some scholars that would argue that this is the gold of the gold, frankincense, of myrrh that was taken into nativity because of its healing properties. So it's got a sort of a long history with humanity, both from culinary purposes, but also sort of used in traditional practice of medicine.
And of course, a lot of us associate turmeric with curries, anything that in deep, but a lot like cannabis, where the CBD is the medicinal part, turmeric, it's the curcuminoids. Did I say that right?
Yes, it's curcuminoids. It's a complicated sort of carbon-rich compound, which, it contains sort of hundreds of different compounds, if we're being honest, but it's curcuminoids, and the most abundant being one called curcumin, which is different to the spice cumin. It is a pigment color in there, and a lot of plants, and this is the root in this case, of turmeric produces this very vivid yellow pigment, which is thought to be the active ingredient. And in the test tube, it's shown to be very powerful as an antioxidant in that it mops up these chemicals, these things called free radicals, which can basically take electrons off atoms in our body, which is not good news if it's a protein or a fat, because it can change its structure. And it's really not good news if it takes that off a piece of DNA. We can show that happens in a test tube, and that can affect cells in a test tube, but which way more complicated than a cell in a test tube, because we have our own defenses against that, which means it might be a different sort of problem in humans. Also, if we actually look at this idea of this compound, how does it get into our bodies? And that's possibly where we can struggle a little bit, because it's not brilliantly absorbed.
Right, and you point that out in the article. What I love, like, just to back up a little bit, is you went and looked at all of the research. What do we know scientifically? Which is really the only thing we can go by. And end of the day, the science really isn't quite there yet, is it? And that's not surprising, because with a lot of supplements, there's not a lot of money going into the research for supplements, and people buy them. So, it's kind of like, how do consumers really understand what is worth spending money? But the point that you were hitting on, which I found really interesting, is turmeric, the properties within it, it's difficult to get into the bloodstream because they're bigger, right? It's harder to be absorbed. Is that right?
In simple term, is bigger. If you're using soap or washing up, you need something to get the things that are fat to mix with water. The curcuminoids probably dissolve better in fats than they do in water, but to be absorbed, They have to go through water to then go through the fat to go to the water into our cells. So the size is because of how what we call lipophilic, fat-loving it is, and rather than being water-sparing, hydrophobic. So it makes it very hard to be absorbed into our cells. There are some studies, and again, many done in animals, which use an extract from pepper, piperin, which fortunately sounds more like the spice rather in this case. And in conjunction in animal models, it seems to enhance the absorption of curcuminoids. I think the other thing to probably note is, although the science is not clear, in the sort of amounts you're using cooking, there's no problem with it. It's safe. It's perfectly safe. So there's no harm from doing it, and there may be small benefits. So I think, when we talk about the science, we can almost ignore the fact that people are using small amounts of this daily, and if it fits within their budget, it doesn't cause a problem. It is safe. What we're possibly doubting is how powerful it is or how efficacious it is in solving the problem. So we need to sort of balance that a little bit.
Right. And you make a good point about that, because this is based on, the amount is based on animal studies, right? And so if we translate those animal studies into human studies, you'd have to take an awful lot. Like, how much would we have to take to see the benefits that we saw in the animal studies?
So it would depend from one study to another, but I think there was one where it gave it sort of 1 gram per kilogram body weight. So if you're talking about that, that would be sort of, and sort of scale it up into from curcumin to turmeric, we'd be talking a 2 kilogram bag of it for that one effect. That was in sort of a particular type of sort of mouse model, because again, that's where it gets complicated, because not all mice in experiments are the same. They're bred for particular purposes and to behave in a certain way, and their biology is altered so we can see these effects. So there's difficulty in translating. But that showed it sort of, it reduced inflammation in the brain and reduced risk of sort of cognition and sort of aging of the brain in this mouse model. Also, mice brains age differently to human brains. So, and the study, if you extrapolate it to human needs, it's a lot. But if you're eating lots of vegetables and dishes and using turmeric as one of the spices in there, will it be a small part of a bigger, healthier diet? Probably yes, if not definitely. And so small gains, I think, we need to focus on rather than trying to get a big hit from one supplement.
So, I mean, I admit I have supplements, turmeric supplements in my cupboard. I actually gave them to my husband the other day, saying, take one every day because he's having problems with his knee. But, what you say is basically we have no idea like how much we actually need. What surprised me, and maybe it's just placebo effect, but when we published your article, we got so many comments from people who had explained their history of using turmeric, and they really felt like it was making a difference. So I guess my question is, what if you take a little bit every day? Do we know if that will have an impact at all and act against inflammation?
So I think I sort of highlighted one study where there's a modest benefit on pain compared to placebo. And in some cases, the individuals found it to be as beneficial as a sort of non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. I say like ibuprofen, it'd be called in the UK. Can't remember what it's called in the US.
Yeah, it is ibuprofen. Same.
That's okay then. So there's similar sort of effects we're seeing. So the effects are modest. They're not sort of always life-changing, and this is not necessarily quite the same as a placebo effect, because if you're actively making a decision to improve your health, and one of those things is to take a supplement, and we've already discussed that a turmeric supplement from a reliable supplier. We need to probably say that about some supplements as well, because there are some that are sort of tainted with other things. So if it is what it says it is, it's not going to be harmful in sensible doses. And because you're making an active decision to improve your health, you're actually moving yourself to a healthy position. So you may have a modest effect of that, some potential placebo effect, but also you're changing your behavior slightly by going in that direction. So all those things are why probably a lot of people have read it going like, oh, the science says this, but I'm having a great benefit. And go like, yes, you probably will, because you're moving yourself on this from having a problem to finding a solution. And the actual biology of that might be quite small. It's the actual what you're doing and how you're interacting with it and you're believing in it, which add up to give a greater effect of that supplement.
Yeah, I mean, I guess part of the frustration from consumers is, how do we know the source of, I mean, and this goes across the board, it's not only turmeric, but how do we know what's a good quality supplement if we're going to invest in this, you know, and if it does have that kind of knock-on effect in our health, how do we know what we're putting inside us is actually trustworthy? I mean, there's no way to know.
So in theory, and regulation is different in different parts of the world, so we need to acknowledge that.
Yes.
In the UK, where we still have the element of European regulation, anything that's deemed a herbal supplement has to at least be safe. We can have problems if it's manufactured outside of that, the UK-Europe area, where it could be, and we've had history of some traditional medicines brought in from sort of Asia, for example, parts of Asia, where they've been tainted with things like mercury. And there's even some of the, not in this case, but weight loss supplements, some of the green tea extracts, where they've even had amphetamines added to them. So if it depends on the regulations of the manufacturer and where it's manufactured, and imported products may not be under the same regulation.
But
we probably need better regulation. That's probably the answer, though.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is that we don't know. I mean, a lot of times when pills are manufactured, there's different places they're getting things, right? So we have no idea knowing where they're actually coming from. I think, I mean, that's what I've been told. You know, it's very hard to find exactly where it's coming from, but that's probably a whole nother topic that we shouldn't go into. So, okay. So you, how many studies did you actually analyze, and give us some of the key takeaways that for people who have not read the article yet?
So for this article, I think I sort of went through around about 10 or 12, but there's another article which I based it on a review we did a number of years ago on the effect of turmeric on cognition. And that was a sort of a more systematic sort of scientific piece of work. This is very much aimed at giving an overview of the sort of the use and the challenges of turmeric. We've actually did a systematic review looking at how it affects sort of the thinking and cognition of the brain. And although there was promise in terms of the brain function, the challenge is because not all the formulations are the same, which is something you've already highlighted. You don't know what you're getting. You don't know what percentage of that is the curcumin. You don't know whether it's been mixed in a mixture to try and enhance its bioavailability, its absorption. And what we need is more research that actually looks at a standardized dose with anything that helps it being standardized. That becomes interesting again, because that then becomes proprietary, so people can trademark it, so they're more likely to invest in the research. And you can see how biases creep in there, because you'll see more noise from something that can be made more profit from. But we do need more study of standardized sort of formulations like this, and sort of we probably need to be more open-minded to well-conducted research that may not be published in English. I mentioned this has got Ayurvedic groundings. Yeah, there's a whole range of literature that's published in the various languages in India, which we don't have access to, and we need to be more open and engage in the literature in a sensible way. And it's very easy to be judgmental from a North American or European perspective that our science is better, when we haven't actually looked using the same rules at the different studies done elsewhere. So we need to look more globally and holistically, but then do the studies with sensible doses of known amounts, and then work with our regulators that they actually certify what's in the tablet, which I think will solve that problem. And then we'll be more sure, if we do have data being effective, that people can access those amounts.
So, I mean, I couldn't think of a better test ground. Over 1 billion people who have turmeric regularly in their diet, to kind of understand benefits. But do we know if, in fact, in India, well, first I want to say, you said these preliminary results looked promising for the brain. What exactly looked promising?
Again, it's a test that you do. And they could be memory tests, they could be reversing information and recording it rapidly type tests. So if you're looking at cognition, that can be quite a short-term thing over a fairly short period of time. It may be people at higher risk of neurodegenerative diseases, but it's very hard to have those studies where you go, let's look at a population age 50, then follow them up at age 70, and those sort of studies are 20 years long. They're very expensive, very complicated. And you mentioned about sort of 1 billion people in the Indian subcontinent eating lots of turmeric. They also eat lots of garlic, lots of ginger, lots of chilies, the alliums. There's other things in their diet, lentils. The physical activity, and also they have other health issues as well. So it's very hard to pick out as one thing. And I think that probably brings it back nicely that yes, there's some interesting stuff here, but it's not the only thing we should do to try and look after our health and our mind as well as our physical health. It could be part of something. And sort of if you're putting turmeric, as you mentioned, in a curry with lots of vegetables, lots of pulses, lots of other great healthy food, there'll be a little effect of all these bits rather than trying to rely on having a bigger dose as a supplement of just one thing.
Yeah. So, this is kind of a silly question, but it's bringing it back to the basics. What do we think the link is in terms of how would the benefits of curcuminoid get into our brains? Is that through the gut brain connection, or how does anything really like a supplement get into our brain so that we would see potential benefit?
So what we've traditionally thought is a very simple model, that it goes into our digestive tract, gets absorbed somehow. We've already acknowledged that's a bit of a challenge with curcumin. Then it goes to our circulation and gets to the brain. Then it's got another barrier to get across into our brain, the blood-brain barrier. So it's got to go through basically sort of a fat barrier, which is the cells. All our cells are lined in fat. Very small fat membrane. Go through that into water, back out again. Be transported somehow in our blood, and then be transported across our brain barrier. So that's quite a hard journey. There is another emerging area of science where they go, wow, we see this going into the body, we see an effect, but we're not really good at measuring a lot of the exact compound in the blood. Is something else happening? And that's where the idea of the gut microbiome has come in that a lot of the things that we can't absorb then interact with the bacteria, where our cells are outnumbered by at least 10, if not 100 to 1, down in our colons, and they ferment and change these compounds, and that may affect the balance of different bacteria. And if you change the balance of different bacteria, they then act on the fibers and produce different, what we call volatile or short-chain fatty acids, which then interact with our biology, not just in terms of the immune function in our gut and our immune function, but in terms of how we handle fats, things like cholesterol, but also sugar and glucose. So it can actually have massive effects on our health overall. And it could be a little bit's being absorbed and a little bit's being altered by the bacteria, interacting with the bacteria, and then the two together, by some twist of biological fate, might be having a modest biological effect and a healthful effect. Then we have a few other things that it might be the fiber from oats has a similar effect, and this pigment in a tomato, and those all things, a little bit might be absorbed and a little bit might be working on the bacteria, and that has a positive effect on our health overall. How we show that and demonstrate that is very hard, because our studies only tend to go one little bit at a time. You get one little tiny piece of a jigsaw. It's not even the whole jigsaw piece, it's probably the little bit that connects into another piece that we see each time we do a bit of research.
Okay, that's that. And thank you for that explanation. That's a really great explanation of the biology and how these supplements work. Can I ask you though, I'm taking advantage of having someone with a PhD in nutrition on being patient. Is there anything for the brain that has been proven to be effective in terms of brain health?
Well, if we look at development, child from preconception through pregnancy, child, there's a lot of data been done over the last 50 years about the fish oils, the omega-3 fatty acids, and brain development. So our brains are rich in them. So we can say that. There's lots of discussion around what we call a Mediterranean type diet. So that's a diet rich in vegetables, low in added fats, low in added sugar, added salt, lots of fiber, the nuts, the seeds, the lentils, some fruit, that sort of dietary pattern, small amounts of alcohol. Lots of alcohol we know is bad for the brain. That's modest amounts of caffeine may be good. So a little bit of tea and coffee may be a good thing. I think I'd go one step further than just the nutrition and what's the composition of food. I think the thing we forget too often, and if we look at the successful societies in the world where they live long, healthy lives, where they're still active physically and mentally, is eating with other people and sharing food. And there's a big concern in the UK and in large parts of the world. When we had the pandemic, people started not eating together. They stopped socializing. And that socializing around food is something that we risk losing, but we need to maintain. And that sharing healthy food with other people is part of what we are as social creatures. And we need to remember it's not just a biology, it's a social aspect of our food behaviors, which contribute to our overall health, our brain health, our mental health, and our physical health.
That is so interesting that you say that, because we had another talk on the 90+ study, which is being conducted in the US. And basically this research studies people 90 years old and or older, right? And they follow them. Some of them had plaque in the brain, beta amyloid plaque, a hallmark of the beginning stage of Alzheimer's, and never got Alzheimer's until they died. So, they have 20 years of data now on people 90+. The one commonality with the people who never got Alzheimer's it was the socialization aspect. They had about 8 hours of socialization a day. And we think, oh my God, 8 hours, how is that even possible? But if you think about it, conversation is using our brains, right? And this is what the scientist told me. She said, when we're having a conversation, we're thinking, we're interacting, we're, comparing to our knowledge, we're formulating questions. That's using your brain. So, one thing that's becoming so clear is that social aspect is so important to staying healthy. So you're just yet another scientist who has told me that you need to socialize. And, what a great way to frame it with a meal, because you mentioned the UK and the US, we're also losing that, sitting down at the dinner table with the family every single night, and we certainly a lot of us don't eat breakfast, lunch with other people. So thank you for sharing that.
And if you look at every culture, every faith, every culture across our globe separately has shared meals at the heart of its festivals and its celebrations. And it brings people together. And we need to have that on a more daily basis of sharing food, enjoying healthy food together, talking about it. And socialization is often forgotten thing that keeps us healthy and connected.
Absolutely. Oh, Dr. Duane Mellor, thank you so much for coming and sharing your knowledge. Really interesting. And we really need more people like you to analyze where the research is at. Obviously people will make their own decisions, but really delving into the science. And again, we hope by bringing awareness that we'll have more research to point to. So thank you for doing that job for us. Again, your article sparked a lot of questions, a lot of comments, and we're grateful.
Thank you very much.
So if you want to see any more of these talks, please go to sign up for our newsletter on beingpatient.com. We let you know every week what's coming up. If you have a suggestion about who you want to hear from or what topic, also email us. I'm Deborah at beingpatient.com and let us know. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time.